Rabbi Bitran has asked me to share this message with you. Dear Barbara, Daniel, Deborah, and Laura, I am saddened by David's passing. He was a beloved husband, father, father-in-law, and grandfather. David attended Temple Bethel on numerous occasions. I have great memories of seeing him at Friday night dinners, Passover Siddurim, and many other synagogue events. He enjoyed the company of family and fellow congregants. On many occasions, he had kind words to say about people and temple activities. Music was a big part of David's life. He bequeathed that love to his children and grandchildren. We will miss him, his voice, his smile, and the way he interacted with us. Tehi Zichro Baruch, may his memory be a blessing to his family. Rabbi Leonardo Bitran. It's unusual to begin on this note, but one of the major issues in Jewish life for more than the past 100 years has been the question of how to navigate. Let me try that one. Any better? We had the same problem on Shabbat. One of the major issues in Jewish life for more than the past 100 years has been the question of how to navigate what can sometimes feel a bit like a tightrope between time-honored Jewish laws and customs on the one hand and the trends and customs of secular life on the other. Ironically, this was an important and recurring theme in David Appelbaum's life. How to live as a Jew in modern times. And so it feels fitting and appropriate that it has entered his family's discussion about today's service. David's children, to their credit, were interested to know what Jewish law would say about playing instruments and singing a tribute to their beloved father at today's service. This wasn't a demand that they made, but rather an inquiry they presented with love and respect, both for their father and for our Jewish tradition. Together in discussion with Rabbi Bitran, who is the rabbi of this community and not me, Rabbi Bitran unfortunately is unable to be here today. It was decided that while mourners themselves at Temple Bethel do not play a direct role in bringing music into a funeral, lest it be misconstrued as celebratory, it would be beautiful for David's grandchildren to offer a loving tribute to their father in song. And I thank them all for the delicacy and respect with which they have approached this issue, and invite the Appelbaum grandchildren to please come up. Today we are going to hear from David's children and his brother-in-law and son-in-law. So I invite Debbie to please come and speak with us.
In approaching the task of deciding what words to share with you today, I went about it a bit like a speech-language pathologist. What are the key words and phrases, the most important themes, the words that would help distill the essence of an entire human into the span of a few short minutes, to capture their essential nature and convey how important they were to you and the community? For most people, coming up with that list of words might prove to be a daunting task. People are multifaceted and complex and have so many different sides to themselves. And the word list might be so different depending on your relationship with that person, within different contexts, or even the day of the week. But somehow, for my dad, coming up with this list becomes the easiest job in the world. In fact, I would bet if everyone here got out a piece of paper right now and just reflexively had to write the first 10 words that popped into your head about my dad, that we would have a remarkable percentage rate of consistency and unity, maybe even 80% overlap. So, what words did you put on your list? Did you put sailing, music, dentistry, family and education? Did you have the US Navy, sense of humor, teacher, community, Judaism? Did you write banjo, ukulele, song? Yes, I had those words too. I think that the key to my dad is not just those specific words, but at the nexus of some of those words and how they come together. Let's try a few word combinations. Humor, dentistry, music. My dad was so dedicated to his work. From a young age, he knew he wanted to be a dentist, a professional, and the first in his immigrant family to attend postgraduate education. Inspired by his beloved uncle, Michael Cowell, his role model and inspiration for being a dentist, sailor, and naval officer. On a daily basis, he would sing little ditties to his patients to make them more comfortable, rhyming songs he would create on the spot, songs about opening wide, and other topics. At least one of his patients asked him to kindly stop singing as he worked on her mouth. My dad had another patient who lived on a farm, who needed a lot of periodontal work. The patient was so grateful for the relief my dad offered him that he named his new cow Dr. Appelbaum. She was a beautiful black and white Holstein cow, and every 6 months or so, we would get a letter in the mail that included a picture of Dr. Appelbaum and an update about her development and her life on the farm. Did you have the word Bobby Lee on your list? I'm sure that you did. Bobby Lee could signify Bobby Lee number 1, the ensign, Bobby Lee number 2, the sequel, the sun cat, that coincided with the birth of Talia, his first grandchild, and then the continued parade of 9 grandchildren who hit the scene afterwards. And then, of course, there was Bobby Lee, the original, the woman herself, the love of his life, whom he named both of those boats after. Barbara Lee Goldberg, his first mate on the water and off, whom he loved so, so dearly and passionately throughout their 59 years together. To hear my dad tell it, he was pushed in early to kindergarten, skipped first grade, and graduated the U of R in 3 years, which often made him feel a bit like a late bloomer and socially awkward, especially when it came to dating. And then, fixed up by a mutual friend in New York, my dad asked out Barbara on their first date, a blind date, to see a play on Broadway. The name of the show was, wait for it, Never Too Late. And blind really is the operative word. Each trying to impress the other, neither wore their glasses. So neither could say much about what the play was about, or even exactly what their date really looked like. Realizing he had met a gem, they were engaged within 9 months. 59 years later, with 3 kids, 3 sons and daughter-in-laws, and 9 grandchildren later, he was just as devoted to my mother as he was when they married. Let's try another keyword combination and see what we come up with. How about family, Judaism, and song? Oh yeah, and that makes me think of another keyword, cowl. The Cowell clan is our huge extended family in Rochester, most Bethel members. Our crew tended to sit together in that section over there. You would typically hear my dad and cousin Richard Briskin there singing, full-throatedly and harmonizing there in prayer and song. My dad's mother, Catherine Appelbaum, used to say that the family that prays together stays together. And she instilled this value so strongly into my dad and his sisters, Brenda and Marjorie. Getting together for all holidays with the greater Diener Bloom Cowell clan was such an essential part of his being and one of the most important values passed on to younger generations. How about this one? Family, music, sailing. Perhaps the nexus of these 3 words most encapsulates Dad, Captain Dave, E. David, Grandpa, Uncle Dave, Ben Dode Dave, Dr. Appelbaum, whatever you called him. My grandma Kate, in her striving to become more assimilated, thought it sounded more distinguished and more American to have an initial with a period followed by his name, like an American journalist. He had no greater pleasure than having his family, all his family, out on the lake singing songs. I couldn't imagine my childhood without Canandaigua Lake and all the lessons my dad would teach us, and then later his grandchildren as well. When I turned 10 years old, he bought me a binder filled with sailing essentials, instructed me to study it, and then took Danny and me down to the high school to sit for the sailing license exam. Parenting and sailing seemed so intertwined from my dad. Important lessons were imparted, such as always clear your lines, or very bad things would happen. Make a plan, bring duct tape, and also, just keep your cool if a hat or a child, who undoubtedly would have been wearing a properly fitting life jacket, happens to fall overboard. No problem, you can turn around and get that hat or that child, or even a beloved uncle, if you keep your eye on them. From the earliest ages, we knew how to tie all kinds of knots, bowlines, cleats. There was a right way and a wrong way of doing things on a boat and in life. And improper preparation might lead to very bad things happening. So be prepared and things will be okay. My favorite races were those October early morning races when there were whitecaps and we needed a sweater under our rain gear. And we went so fast, we needed to sit outside the cockpit to flatten the boat. I remember the thrill I felt when I was old enough to stand on the deck and work the spinnaker. Through these experiences, my dad helped us build confidence and independence, resourcefulness, and problem solving. My dad just could not wrap his brain around the idea of anyone sitting on the shore, reading or sleeping. How could you not be out on a boat? It's a perfect sailing day. His greatest pleasure was to get my mom, kids, grandkids, friends and family, or even relative strangers out, teach lessons, and sing songs together. He was the OG work-life balance guy. He had that all figured out long before Gen Z. Shortly after my dad passed, it occurred to me that the last day of Shiva is going to be the first day of our annual Apple family gathering at Canandaigua Lake. This year, we almost can't imagine what it will be like without him, what a tremendous hole we will feel being at the lake. From the first moment of the first grandchild, Grandpa was always there with a ukulele or banjo at the ready to sing a song to an antsy or colicky child who needed a lullaby or distraction. As the 9 grandchildren have grown, What was once Grandpa with the ukulele in the campfire has turned into at least 5 guitars around the fire. While we will feel his absence most acutely in that space, I know that next week and moving forward, that when my family gets together and sings next to the lake under the stars, my dad's spirit will be with us. Thank you, Dad, for all that you have given us.
Our dad had a big presence, huge actually, his physical stature, of course, but more just his general presence, which could fill a room, a house even. But because of this, so was the attention he paid to you when you spoke, and the love and respect he gave to us all. Despite his large presence, he was humble and modest, and not one that just liked to hear himself speak. My dad loved his family and always found ways to show it. He insisted we continue to get together at the lake each summer, even when he himself wasn't able to stay down there with us. It was actually one of his favorite things. In fact, one of his last phone calls he made from his hospital bed, with really limited ability to speak, was to the Canandaigua Country Club, confirming our table for 12 for next week. My dad had humble beginnings. He was born the first child of a very large Eastern European Jewish immigrant clan, the Cowell clan, and hence raised by many close aunts and uncles and their spouses, 18 in all. They lived in one small apartment. He became the oldest of many, many cousins. At Temple, I always felt like we were related to half the congregation. As a first-generation American, he straddled Orthodox Judaism and American patriotism. He lived through and remembered the tough, lean times of old, such as growing victory gardens, and old country shtetl superstitions like swinging chickens in the backyard. Family and religion, or specifically prioritizing the family aspects of religion, shaped so much of his outlook. As Debbie mentioned, he commonly said, "The family that prays together stays together." As his father's auto parts business, Shield Supply Company, grew, his family joined the ranks of America's growing middle class. Pushed out of a small, overpacked apartment to start kindergarten early and then graduating the U of R in 3 years, he started dental school at age 20, several years younger than his classmates. Although he was interested in pursuing the family auto supply business, his father, my Grandpa Les, encouraged him to pursue a professional career, so he followed his revered Uncle Mike Cowell into dentistry, as he also followed him into sailing and military service. A full accounting of my dad's many activities, passions, and accomplishments would take too long to do it justice. But here's a partial list in no particular order. Eagle Scout, and he was very proud of all of these. Eagle Scout, varsity golf letterman, clarinetist in the Brighton Symphony, photographer, you may not know he had his own darkroom, English major, naval lieutenant, ensign fleet, sometimes champion, RPYO treasurer, Canandaigua Lake Pure Water Society board member, periodontist, professor of dentistry, and so passionate about teaching. Started his own practice, his own business. In that capacity was a landlord, handyman, fixed his own boats, built his own rafts, financial advisor to many of us, to all of us probably, coached our rec teams as kids, twice weekly shulgoer, Hebrew school teacher, committed Haftorah reader, passionate volunteer and leader in Jewish causes, oldest brother of 3 siblings, and dozens of younger Rochester cousins, oldest cousin, the greater Cowell clan, husband, father, grandfather, uncle. He would do all these activities with passion, intellect, practicality, and always a smile on his face and a silly made-up song on his lips.
After dental school, when many of his cohort were looking for ways to avoid the draft, he could have started dental practice, but he was truly a patriot. He really, really wanted to serve his country, which he was so proud. And he eagerly signed up for the Navy, entering officer training school. Before long, he was a lieutenant in the Navy and a captain in the Marines, spending a year in Iwakuni, Japan, in Vietnam as a naval dentist. He was issued a sidearm with minimal firearm training. While his roommates over in the Pacific were hesitant to share a room with him because of that, they had the healthiest gums in the Pacific. He also led satyrs when he was in Japan, and this time allowed him to combine his greatest passions in life, his patriotism, his Judaism, his dentistry, through the Navy, his love of boats, and you can bet he played and sang many ditties along the way. He had an extremely high moral standard. If when in doubt, pay the tax. Don't take the deductible, every time. He was self-made. He was so warm, generous, self-effacing, and humble. He insisted on doing work himself. He mowed his own lawns, shoveled his own driveway, and he instilled these traits in us when we became a little older than 6, as we would be behind that lawnmower and that shovel, me and Debbie and Laura, for many years, made us who we are. You could do whatever you wanted in life as long as you had a plan. You wanted to be a professional clown? Fine. Let's talk about the best clown schools, the best internships, whatever you wanted, you just have to have a plan. Now I'm going to apologize here for some of the rest of this. The moment my father died, as I was holding his hand, while I was holding his hand with my sisters, I cried a lot. I wailed. I don't think the nurses, anyone's heard a grown man wail that loud and that long, maybe ever. Daryl Kaplan was in the room, and she can attest to that as well, I'm sure. And I, of course, respect the heck out of my dad. But I'm going to tell a few stories, and I apologize if some of them have a little kind of humor, maybe even a little irreverent. That's how I'm going to be able to get through the rest of this talk, by keeping it a little irreverent. My father was, as many of you, or probably all of you know, never shied away from singing a silly ditty and being funny. So I guess I come by it honestly, even in times like this. But I was trying to think and distill his essence in just a couple words, and we've talked about it already. But what he really wanted in life, and for everyone around him, was for you to be successful at what you were doing, while having fun, while doing things the right way, and being safe. That's really it. And there was a right way and a wrong way of doing things. And he felt very strongly that things needed to be done the right way. Very, very strongly. So, as Debbie mentioned, he coached us. He was my basketball coach. He would train us, the entire team. He was my basketball coach only briefly. He would train us to run the pick and roll and the picket fence, and he had plays 2, 3, and 5. And some games when we weren't quite on and following the right plan of action at the right time, he would get a little emotional, and he'd have to excuse himself into the JCC locker room. Seth Briskin would have to jump in as a player coach for a quarter or so. We were 5. But this is who we are. This is who he was. Everything needed to be planned in advance and executed just the way it was meant to be. I wanted to be just like him, but I could not always match his achievements. He was an Eagle Scout. He's very proud of this. He achieved all 55 patches. I never made it out of the lowest tier of Cub Scouts. I think I got 2 patches. But my fondest scouting memory was probably the Pinewood Derby. They'd give you a simple pine box. That's not funny, Dad. And because it was very pliable and easy to kind of work with, and we would race against the other cars. Well, we showed up, and all the kids had these very fancy. They were polished. They were aerodynamic. They looked like spaceships and probes. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm looking at my car that me and my dad had worked on, and it was still a block. He kind of painted a couple racing stripes on it and put a leprechaun and a fake little windshield in there. He was actually very creative, surprisingly. You wouldn't think of him having a creative side with language and with his hands, but he was amazingly creative. Anyway, I was like, Dad, what are we doing here? Look at those Pinewood cars. He said, Dan, trust me. And he knew that it wasn't how the car looked on the outside, how slick it was, but he said it's all about the inside, the innards of the car. It's how much it weighs. That's really it, Danny. The weight and the graphite of the wheels. His father was an auto supply guy. He grew up around cars. He knew this. But he was prepared, and there's a set of judges that have scales and weighing the cars. He showed up with a little awl to dig things out of the bottom of the car and a handful of fishing sinkers for the weight. He stuffed them in the bottom, put in some liquid glue. The judges looked at the scales. He got it just right. And they're like, oh, no, okay, we're going to allow this car. Put a little graphite on the wheels. We line them all up, and all the other Cub Scouts laughing. Look at that car with a leprechaun. Well, guess who won the Pinewood Derby? Guess who had to skip the state championship because it was on Shavuot, but I was the only one that got to advance to the next round. I was very proud of that. Again, he always taught me it's not what's on the outside, it's what goes on inside, and what's really important, that's important. I can only remember 2 times in his life that he knowingly did something that he felt was not the proper and safe way to do things. And both of the time was my fault, and both of the times involved boats, and they both ended badly. He wanted to make me happy, even sometimes it went against his better wishes. One time was in the National Championship Regatta for his beloved ensign fleet, and we were up against all the hot shots all around the country, and we're coming into a buoy mark, and he's like, oh, we're not going to make it, we better go around. I'm like, Dad, we're gonna come in last if we do that. We can do it, trust me, let's just sneak inside. He's like, there's another boat coming. I think, Dad, just trust me, we're going to make it. He listened to me, we snuck around inside, and we didn't make it. The boat collided, we call it a T-bone. 2 thousands and thousands of pound boats. These aren't little sunfish. Crushed in the side of our boat, a hole pops in, a hole springs on the side, water's pouring in. I mean, we're going to sink, we're going to drown. Maybe not drown because we had life jackets, but thankfully his crew was all dentists and periodontists who were experts in repairing holes in wet spaces. And they leapt to action. You got plaster and duct tape. Within a minute, that hole was, temporarily patched, but effectively patched. And we went on to finish the race. I would say that's the last time he listened to me, overcoming his own cautiousness and how to do things right. But there's one more time that finally pushed him over the edge. We were vacationing. We had rented a big sailboat in the Virgin Islands. It was just our family. He was the captain. And it was New Year's Eve, 1990. Big New Year's Eve party. And he decided that we're going to spend it at a very quiet restaurant on Joost van Dyke with some slow calypso music and a lot of older couples there. And of course, as a teenager, I was not happy with that New Year's Eve plan. And so I moped and pouted and screamed, and maybe not screamed, but demanded that we go 2 islands over to the Virgin Gorda where there was this big happening club, lots of women. Well, he said, Daniel, there's a storm coming on the cloud. I see on the horizon that sky is getting dark. I said, come on, Dad, it's fine. It's just over there. The island's that way. He listened to me. Well, it was about a 4-hour journey, and 3 of those hours, it was like, You can imagine the worst sailing movie with the giant waves in the storm, and he's just, I told you, Daniel, this is not the right way. I took him out of his comfort zone. We almost got into big trouble. We ended up at the club at night. No girls talked to me. But I learned that what he was doing, and I realized that, he wasn't just being unnecessarily nervous, that bad things can happen, bad things do happen, and there's a right way to do things, and you really should do it that way. The only thing he taught me a lot. The only thing he probably never taught me, though, was how to be popular with the ladies. I wanted to be just like him. He taught me how to sail. He took me around from lake to lake. In the summers, I would race my little sailboat called a laser. It's like a glorified sunfish. And when I was younger, he would follow me around in not our big motorboat, but it was a little dinghy with a motor on the back. And this is the middle of the lake. And one race, it was an important race. I'm hiking out on the laser, and my tiller extension broke, and I went heels over head, flipped over backwards into the water. Boat capsized. Immediately, my father was there. He had his whole preparation kit of all sorts of tools and stuff. He leaped into the water, fixed the tiller. I hear some screwing, banging and stuff, but all of a sudden I heard an ah! And he was on the other side of the boat. I said, Dad, what happened? He's like, nothing. Got my boat back up. I got back in the boat, sailed on my way. Only came in second last. Well, it wasn't until a few days later where I saw his hand heavily bandaged with duct tape and seeping blood, and for weeks, actually. He had to give up a couple days of work just to make sure that I was going to do well in that race, and he put his body on the line. He even needed to take off of work. He kept our house very shipshape as well. He wanted everything to run smoothly. Growing up, we had to answer the phone in the following manner. Remember, these are landlines on the wall. Hello, Appelbaum residence, this is Daniel speaking, may I help you, please? We're 8 years old. Well, and you had to always kind of take your chances because you didn't want to answer that way to friends or girls. But if it was him calling and you didn't answer that way, he would finish the sentence for you, and then he was just, though, really interested in everything running smoothly. Now, it's funny. I have my own residence now, I have my own children, but I have my own children at work, I call them, and they always answer the telephone in the reading room, and they'll say, hello. And I said, you can't just say hello. And they say, hospital, radiology. I said, guys, let's answer the phone the following. Hello, this is Dr. Yang. You've reached nuclear medicine. So I'm doing the exact same thing. And kids, you're lucky we don't have any landlines anymore. They all have their cell phones. In fact, I tried calling them. I say, why don't you call me back? They don't say, oh, I don't use the phone app anymore. I don't like that app. But again, the one thing he never taught me was how to impress the ladies. He was always so warm and welcoming to everyone. He wanted everyone to have fun, especially sailing, but again, everything had to be done properly, and so all my friends growing up had a healthy respect for him. Even as a grown man, I remember a time David Coco, may he rest in peace, talked to Michael Berlowitz since we're like in our 30s, and he said, geez, I'd love to go over to Danny's house, and I probably will, but between you and me, I'm still a little afraid of Captain Dave. I related the story to my dad, just kind of, I was trying to rib him a little bit, and he was stunned. He said, what do you mean people were a little nervous about me? I didn't use the word terrified. What do you mean? I was too easy on you guys. He honestly, this was all just for concern and love and success. He was shocked. He was thoughtful, selfless, generous to a fault. He never cared about himself, only others. After his father passed away, the auto supply magnate, he inherited the baby blue bomber, this Ford Granada. Remember this long blue hood that went on for years? We called it the Blue Bomber. And even though his father was an auto supply magnate, The car had no working AC, and it had no radio or any sort. Well, very quickly, my father gave me that car. Daniel, I'd like you to have my father's car. After he made sure I took some remedial driving lessons, because I wasn't stopping all the way at the red lights, just to be sure. But after those lessons, he handed it to me, and I happily drove around, window down a little bit, in complete silence. One day, though, a couple weeks later, I was leaving the house, and he handed me a compact disc. Those are things that spin around, and you go into the thing. And I said, "What's this?" He's like, "Well, it's Gilbert and Sullivan, Pirates of Penzance." I said, "I can see that, but why are you handing it to me while I'm walking outside?" He said, "You never know when you're going to need a CD." So I walked into the car, and lo and behold, he had installed a radio and a CD player, because everything else he's got going on, he's thinking about my happiness. Now, the Pirates of Penzance may not have been my choice of CDs, although I did secretly kind of like it. And I guess at this point I would say, again, the one thing he never taught me was how to be popular with the ladies, but actually, if you think about it, he did incredibly well with the ladies, his wife, my mother, and in fact, so did I. And so I guess these qualities of just trying to do the right thing, being there for people, loving others, which I tried to do, made him, and I guess me, more attractive than I realized. Our dad, of course, was certainly a character, a larger-than-life presence who, despite singing silly songs all the time, commanded tremendous respect. He was loving and caring to a fault, and he was the greatest, and he lived a life that you just wanted, that you just needed to emulate. Because of him, I am a musician, a sailor, a doctor, an educator, a committed Jew, a proud Zionist. I try to be a dedicated father and husband. I never swear in front of my family, hardly ever. And I try to live by the highest moral and ethical standards. And because of him, I just try to live a life that is true and that is right. So thank you, Dad.
We wanted to share a little bit about his final day because it was quite remarkable in some ways. No one wants the end to come, but my dad's end was quite remarkable, so we wanted to share. We were sitting surrounding my dad, my siblings, and my mom, holding his hand in arms, me with my guitar, singing Hebrew songs to welcome Shabbat. And we really believe he was hearing us because the day before he was actually joining in on singing with us in his familiar harmonies, even on songs we always sang. So this was a familiar scene with its roots back to the reverse image, he playing ukulele and banjo for us, and then our grandkids, to bring joy and comfort and happiness to whatever the scene was, or just because. And it means everything to us that we were able to do that for him. And as the phrases of Oseh Shalom filled the space around him, as the grandkids sang in the opening of this service, he drifted off of the phrases, Oseh Shalom b'mamav, may the one who makes peace in the heavens make peace for us. And he drifted off, surrounded by our love and our music. Thank you.
Jerry.
Spent a few hours last night and this morning writing out this whole speech that I wanted to give, but I'm looking around this synagogue and I'm thinking back 59 years and 1 month or so ago, and I was standing right out those doors, right outside, about to walk down the aisle to begin the service and greeting my wife-to-be, and behind us, there was a line, maybe, I don't know, 10, 12 relatives, whatever, and right behind me was your Uncle David, your dad, and I remember his words, his important words to me. He said, "You, keep your eyes straight ahead. You look around and you look at my sister before you're supposed to, and you're going to get a kick right up the rump." Okay? I understood and followed the rules. So I want to thank you, the Appelbaum family, for the honor of speaking at this sad yet celebratory occasion of truly a life well lived. You heard from the children. I can't possibly max or keep up with what they know about their dad, but he and I go back as a different perspective. In fact, I would think, with the exception of some of Dave's lifelong friends, I think I knew Dave as long as almost anyone who might be sitting out here today. So my perspective goes way back, a little history. In 1957, I met Dave's sister, Brenda, at Camp Ramah, and started going out with his middle sister, who later became my beautiful wife of 59 years. We were then 14 years old. Bren would tell me about her family, and when the subject of her brother David came up, it was with pride, genuine love, and affection. She would tell me about Big Brother and how he would tease her, delegate unwanted jobs like digging for worms before allowing her to join in the exalted pleasure of taking a fishing trip with him on the family boat at Canisius Lake. If teasing and annoyances of two young sisters was a way of his life, so too was revenge, particularly by younger sister Margie, Alel Shalom. We would have a Seder every year. You guys know what's coming, right? And it would be at the Appelbaum residence, and one of the aspects of the Seder was the rachatz, which is the washing of hands. And somebody would have to go around the table, and everybody would wash their hands in this big bowl that was prepared. Well, Sister Margie was delegated that job, and she was going around the table, and you talked about Uncle David and making his ditties as he goes along. He just made one up. Rachatz girls, won't you come out tonight? Come out tonight. So this is right about at the beginning of the women's lib movement, you know? And Auntie Margie was not one to take that kind of thing lightly. So when it came time to get to Uncle David's section and where he would wash his hands, didn't work that way. She took the whole bowl of water, threw it all over his lap, and he's there soaking wet, looked like you only know what. And everybody is laughing, but the person that was laughing the loudest was Uncle David. He just thought that was the greatest. Now, Dave was, as we know, and as was discussed, he was demanding. He was demanding of his kids, demanding of his children, demanding of his wife. I remember even in teaching the kids music and the love of music, he would have this stick, and it would go, keeping time, and if anybody was a little bit off, you got to do it all from the beginning, start it all over, and you're going to do it in accordance with his measure. But he was also the big brother who was entrusted with the care of his two younger sisters by his parents. Should the care ever be needed, a job he took very seriously. For example, he told his two young sisters, if they refrained from smoking, he told them this early on, if they refrained from smoking, he promised he would give them a present as they approached adulthood. Now, nobody remembers what that present was, but it's not important to the story. He was caring about his sisters. I remember a trip, we met him. I was in school at Penn State. I was going to visit Brenda in Boston. We drove up, we met Dave. He had a date. Barb, I don't remember who it was. It wasn't important. I knew I either had a headache or I needed some gum or something, and I said, Dave, can we stop at this drugstore? And he looked at me and he said, what do you have to stop at this drugstore for? I said, a piece of gum. Relax. Anyway, he was protective. Dave and I met for the first time at Camp Ramah, 1959. He was 21, I was 16. It was the third summer of Bren and I being boyfriend and girlfriend. And he and I spoke in one of these little, I don't know what they call them, huts or something. And it was just the two of us. And we were having a good time, but then we ran out of words, and I think the only time in our lives. And we didn't know what to say. So we started looking at each other's feet, and we admiring the size of each other's shoes. Right? He had a size 13, and I had a 12. And I would say he was always that much of a bigger person to look up to. He was the one big brother that I never had, and I told him that once, and it's true. When I was invited to visit Bren a few years later at a Rochester home, I would say I wrote down misfortune to have Dave as my roommate, but that's really not true. I'll tell you why. But the fortunate part was that he and I had the opportunity to do a lot of talking, and one of the things we spoke about was Yiddish, and that was the beginning. And we each knew maybe 10 or 15 Yiddish words, and we would just repeat those words to each other. Well, as the years went by, these words, the same 15 words that we both knew, we could carry on a conversation for 30 minutes, But the misfortune of being with him, which nobody told me about ahead of time, was his snoring. And I have to tell you that his snoring wasn't a sweet violet kind of thing. It was a blast, and the blast would come out about every 10 seconds. So the idea was I had to hurry up and get to sleep, or it's never going to happen because that blast is going to hit again. And I was pretty tired in the morning. Now, Dave's parents, Les and Kate Appelbaum, were two very intelligent and sensitive people. I had the highest admiration for both, having met them, or maybe when I was 14, 15 years old. I couldn't understand one thing, that in the dining room of their home, you know what's coming, there's a picture. There's one picture in that dining room. There's 3 kids, but there's one picture, and who is it? Uncle David. It's right up there. And where am I sitting every time? Every time we're at the Passover Seder or a Yom Tov for Rosh Hashanah, whatever, I am sitting opposite that picture looking up at Uncle David, you know? And I'm thinking, you know, these two intelligent parents and so sensitive, how could they, you know, just put one picture? Where are the other 2 girls, you know? Well, I figured it out. At least that's my theory. And I think what they were saying to David is, look, you are the oldest. You're up here, but you have a responsibility. And your responsibility is to care for your 2 sisters and to care for your own family when you grow up. And I think that must have been in their mind because they were too smart for anything else. So as the years progressed, Dave was in contact with his sisters, always asking about their lives, if they needed anything from him. And when Margie got sick, and Dave was powerless to change the outcome, he was really beside himself, you know, and he found communication with Margie to be very difficult at the end. And I now understood what it was, that, you know, here he was, that he was supposed to be the protective one, and he couldn't do it, and, but he cared so much that his defense mechanism played in, and he couldn't speak. Okay, on the lighter notes, his love of boats we know about, his music, his singing, his guitar playing, banjo playing. My first visit, I still remember, to Rochester. It was in the living room of his parents, and he and Dick Briskin took out their banjos, and for hours they entertained us with the Kingston Trio and Burl Ives and all the groups from that genre. And they were good. They were really good. They harmonized, and they were good musicians. Let's see, what did I want to tell you? So, you heard about the ensign, the sailboat, the Bobby Lee. That was definitely a love and a passion of his, that Bobby Lee, and so too his wife of the same name, as you heard, and for 59 years. Barb, he loved you, even as he barked his orders and questioned your intelligence and mine on his boat when his orders were not followed precisely. But oh, how Dave would bark those orders to you beyond the racing days on the boat. But oh, how he loved you and admired you, Barb. Even at the end, when he'd ask you to leave the room when he and I had a private phone moment together, he asked you to leave, and 2 minutes later, I hear him, "Where's Barb? Somebody bring Barb back in." He couldn't stand to be without you, even for those 2 minutes. You guys certainly had a special relationship. He loved his kids. He loves their mates. He loves his grandchildren, his nieces, his nephews, and his great-nephews and nieces. He was called the Great Dode Dave. Dode Dave Hagadol is how he would refer himself to our grandchildren. And he was proud of that. And he knew everyone, and he knew everyone by name, and he knew what they were doing, and he was interested in whatever they were doing. And he would comment and make suggestions. And believe me, his suggestions were valuable ones, I know. So our 10 Yiddish words would result in hours of discussion, jokes that would give us belly laughs. He didn't like off-color jokes, I have to tell you. I don't know what that was about. He had a really lousy golf game. I don't know how he made the team, Dan, but it was really annoying to play golf with him because he would make me stand like 20 yards away because I couldn't see the ball or whatever. He'd whiff it 50% of the time anyway, and we'd be on the golf course for 5-6 hours. But that was Uncle David. We'll all miss you, but certainly we have lots to remember you by. He called me maybe a week before he passed away, maybe it's 10 days. Always wants to know how his sister's doing, how the kids are doing. But this time he wanted to tell me a joke, you know, and I'm gonna share this one because I think I can. And it just created a lot of laughter, even with the current condition that he was under. So he's talking about this guy, Yankala, and his mother. And they're having a Friday night Shabbos meal. Yankala loved his mother's challah, roasted chicken, chicken soup, and everything that went with it. And he's enjoying the meal and enjoying the dessert and the tea afterwards and everything. And mother says, you know, Yankala, it's Friday night, it's Shabbos. You got to get up, you got to get to shul. He says, I don't want to go to shul. He says, what do you mean you don't want to go to shul? It's Friday night. He says, Mom, I'm going to give you 2 reasons why I don't want to go to shul. 1, I don't like the people so much there. And 2, they don't like me either. So his mother says to Yankala, I'm going to give you 2 reasons why you better go to shul. Number 1, you're 40 years old. Number 2, you're the rabbi. So that was Uncle David's last bequest of a humor. And I have to say, Dave, I don't honestly, even the last time I was in Rochester, he and I sat down, and you really gave me some spot-on advice on an issue. It's going to remain with Uncle David and me what the advice was, and but suffice it to say that it really he could hardly breathe. He could hardly stand up. He couldn't stand up, but he wanted so much to help me with an issue, and he was so spot on. And Dave, you know, we've had some ups, we've had a few downs, very few downs, but I mean, all my life, you were my big brother. And I'll remember you for a long time. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I think most of you know me, but for those who don't, I'm Ed Mitri, husband of Debbie, and one of Dr. E. David Appelbaum's 3 children-in-law. I've known Grandpa and feel I've been very close to him for 33 years, and I'm terribly sad he's passed away. He was a wonderful man. The first time I visited him in his home in Rochester was in the summer of '91. He didn't know much about me at the time. He knew I'd been dating Debbie for a few months, and he knew I was from Pittsburgh. I know this because when he met me for the first time in Rochester, he came up to me, smiled, shook my hand, and presented me with a gift, a Pittsburgh Panthers drinking glass. Apparently, Sunoco was having a promotion selling drinking glasses from different universities. Grandpa had to stop and get some gas on the way home from work, and clearly had thought, I'm meeting Debbie's new boyfriend. He's from Pittsburgh. He'll probably like it if I get him this glass. And I did. Actually, I cherished that glass. It was very thoughtful, and I feel it reflected the thoughtfulness he always had for other people. I think a common quality of Grandpa was he always enjoyed sharing his passions. Whatever it was, he wanted others to share in the joy of that activity. Singing the ukulele, laughing at bad puns and corny jokes, or discussing new techniques in periodontics. He loved periodontics. He was an expert periodontist, and he taught for decades. He taught until just a few weeks ago, and it was very important to him, and he was very much revered by his students. So if you ever had a dental question and you brought it up to him, you would get a nice discussion, and he would, enthusiastically talk about it with you. So as for me, prior to meeting the Appelbaums, I had never been on a sailboat, and as you've heard, that was a passion of Grandpa's. And he saw me and said, well, you've never been on a sailboat. I'm going to teach you how to do it. So for years, he taught me things like the differences between port and starboard, what a sheet is, and how to trim the jib. I still more or less know what those terms mean. When my kids were born, he taught me, in a kind and very patient way, important principles about home economics. My guess is, and I think Laura or Dan mentioned this before, that I am not the only person in this room who has been given some solid advice on saving for retirement from Grandpa. But those lessons took hold. These days, as my own children are entering the workforce, I hear myself repeating the lessons Grandpa taught me. Of everything he shared with me, I think the most valuable were family vacations. Grandma and Grandpa invited me to go on vacation with the Apple family sometime in the mid-1990s. For over 25 years, we've spent a week together every winter, and in the summers, a week together at Lake Canandaigua. Those experiences have been priceless. I'd like to close with just a few comments on the names I've used for Grandpa over the years. When I first met him, Dr. Appelbaum was Dr. Appelbaum. It's a bit of a formal title, but certainly one that was deserved. Over time, Dr. Appelbaum transitioned to Captain Dave. Seemed to have the right mix of respect and familiarity. For well over a decade, though, I've just referred to him simply as Grandpa. When I was with him during his recent hospitalization, more than once I heard the hospital staff remark about me, quote, "That visitor in there," they were talking about me, "is a bit weird. He keeps calling our patient Grandpa. But that guy in there, he's not a grandson, he's the son-in-law." And that really bothered me. I wanted to explain that Grandpa was the right name for Grandpa, as he was a patriarch of a family with a loving wife, 3 wonderful children and their spouses, and 9 loving grandchildren. And he identified very much with being in the role of a grandpa. During his recent hospitalization, I tried many times to engage him in a little bit of conversation. We would talk about current events, favorite ice cream flavors, trips he had taken. It was hard for him to talk, but we would chat. But the one topic he always enjoyed discussing was going over the names, ages, and current activities of each of his grandchildren. Sam, Beatrice, Nathan, Noah, Tess, Mabel, Talia, Mira, and Jonah. I know you all know this, so I don't really have to say it, but I just want to assure you, Grandpa loved you all so, so much, and he was super proud of each and every one of you. Grandpa had many passions in his life, but none that was greater than family. So thank you so much, Grandpa, for all the wonderful experiences and life lessons. You will be very, very missed.
A Psalm of David. Do we deserve to enter God's sanctuary? Can we merit a place in the presence of God? Live with integrity, do what is right, speak the truth without deceit. Have no slander upon your tongue. Do no evil to others. Do not mistreat your neighbor. Spurn a contemptible person, but honor those who revere Adonai. Never retract a promise once made, though it may bring you harm. Lend no money at unfair rates. Accept no bribe against the innocent. Make these deeds your own, and then shall you stand firm forever. Mizmor leDavid, Adonai ro'i lo echsar, binodesha yarbitzeni, al mei menuchot yenahaleni, nafshi yeshovev, ינכני במגלי צדק למען שמו. גם כי אלך בגיא צל מוות, לא אירא כי אתה עמדי. שבטך ומשענתך המה ינחמוני. תערוך לפני שולחן נגד צוררי, דישנת ושמן ראשי, כוסי רוויה. אך טוב וחסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי, ושבתי בבית אדוני le'orech yamim. A Psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd, and I want for nothing else. God makes me lie down in green pastures. God leads me beside the still waters. God restores my soul. God guides me in straight paths for God's own name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are always with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil, and my cup runs over. Surely, goodness and kindness alone shall be with me and follow me all the days of my life, and I will live in God's house throughout time. Today, David's family has done a magnificent job of touching on intimate knowledge of a lifetime lived with this man who has been described to me, and I've heard today has been described larger than life, a large presence. So let me take the liberty of summing up some of what I've heard in our discussions before today and today by reflecting on what lies ahead in a few days. This coming Shabbat, in the opening words of Parashat Matot, our eyes will fall immediately on a description of the meaning of commitment, conveying the understanding that commitment is not just between us and someone else, but that God comes into the picture too. When we make a commitment, we swear to live by something, allowing it to work its ways into our lives so that it becomes part of the essence of who we are. We've heard about numerous commitments that David took really, really seriously. A commitment to work, a commitment to family, commitment to fun, commitment to 401ks. David too was thoroughly committed to being part of his people, to being a Jew. For him, this didn't just mean showing up to services a few times a week, which he did. It entailed grappling with big questions, wrestling with some difficult answers, truly understanding and demonstrating what is meant by the blessing we say every day. V'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed is our God who commands us to deal with, not just pay a superficial lip service to Torah. Growing up in a world of shlogan kaporos and wearing tzitzit to Monroe High School gym class, trying to figure out how to meld these ancient symbols of belonging and obligation and commitment with a complex modern world of choices and freedoms was very much a part of David's Jewish experience. In his commitment to Judaism, David came to learn and understand the Jewish sense that if used productively, struggle can be a most positive endeavor, thanks to the opportunities for growth and meaning that it brings to our lives. And this is only but some of what David leaves us with. And there's so much more. The compulsion for sailing, the compulsion that you too should develop a compulsion for sailing. Music, where to begin? And so we now have to say goodbye. Goodbye to David Appelbaum, beloved husband, a father, grandfather, brother, brother-in-law, uncle, cousin, friend, dentist, admiral of the Finger Lakes, and now ukulele player in God's own celestial orchestra. We pray that David might find rest after a life truly well lived, after bringing so much to this world, and after leaving so much behind as his legacy. His outsized presence will live forever in the hearts of all who loved him. And this world is forever changed by his having traveled part of the road with us. Yehi Zichro Baruch. The memory of you will be a blessing to us. At this point, may I ask you to rise for the memorial prayer, after which we will leave the synagogue for Britain Road Cemetery. El male rachamim shochen bamromim hametzei menucha nechona tachat kanfei hashchina b'ma'alot kedoshim u'tvarim כזובת הרקיע מזהירים את נשמת ישראל דוד בן אליעזר וגיטל שלח לעולמו בגן עדן תהא מנוחתו. אנא בעל הרחמים הסתירהו בסתר כנפיך לעולמים. וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו, אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו. ונאמר Amen. Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure to the soul of David Appelbaum, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. May I ask for the pallbearers to please step forward.